Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I first didn't change the name of the university. I'm sorry. I've been traveling around the world too much lately. Sorry, just a moment. I was first asked to give a talk on my work on geography of the Islamic world, historical geography, but then I received an email also asking to talk about the OCR work that we've been doing. So it's going to be kind of eclectic here. So I'll start with a short description of collections of Arabic texts. And issues, problems, size, and all this kind of things. Then I switched to analysis of one biographical collection that I've been working on most, and I'll focus on cultural geography here mostly, and I'll finish with just highlights of our most recent work on modeling Islamic geography and developing a gazetteer for the classical Islamic world. So, in practical terms, from text to map. So, how do we get from a text from large collections of historical information to some kind of visualization or some kind of a distant ways of reading this text? So, all in all, that's an exercise in a field that's now been known under the name of digital humanities. And I'll give you this definition just to provide a framework for what is going to follow. So digital humanities in this case is an engagement with in a kind of humanistic research that cannot be done without digital methods, where complexity and novelty of which research tasks would vary from impossible without 500 monks at hand to otherwise unthinkable. Such research would rely on large volumes of data, for example, corpora, full-text primary sources, and a variety of digital approaches that allow converting raw data into meaningful information and then exploring it with different visualization techniques in order to trace long-term, large-scale developments. Okay, so that's a framework of my work. In terms of books and like theoretical framework, we get a lot of inspiration from works of Franco Moretti and Matt Chuckers, who Franco Moretti is the one who introduced this notion of distant reading. But also the idea of algorithmic deformation, algorithmic analysis that is, I think, very neatly conceptualized in the work of Stephen Ramsey. And the idea is that whenever we do any kind of reading of text, we break down text into elements, and we ignore everything that's not relevant to our specific research question, and we focus only on things that are relevant to our specific question right now. So we effectively deform the text every time we read it. And his suggestion is that we can actually use machines to exhaust all possible readings of a text. He, of course, is speaking in the context of literature, and in context of history, it will be slightly different, nonetheless. So now, collections of Arabic text. In the course of a couple of decades already, we've been witnessing the proliferation of digital library of full-text Arabic sources. Many of them available on CDs, even on hard drives. Lots of them are now available also online. And we're talking about thousands of texts. There's certain issues with the coverage of these collections, because they're mostly done in the Middle East and developed by people who have specific religious interests. So that affects which texts they include and which they don't. So you're not going to find a lot, or actually any scientific, philosophical, medical texts in those collections. But they very, very well represent Sunni traditional scholarship. A at the same time, it's rather difficult to estimate to evaluate chronological geographical coverage and the overall coverage. But again, these collections were not developed by academics for academic purposes, so we have no right to criticize this work. If anything, that's actually a really well done work. The quality of text often is absolutely astonishing. It's most of them were most likely double keyed. So it's a method when two people are sitting next to each other and typing the same text, and whenever there is an error, the monitor and there's a sound bell, and they correct it right away. So with that method, you get the highest quality of conversion of text from print to digital form. The problem, of course, it's also most expensive method because you pay two people and they pay per page, so you can never scale it up. So, and just to give you an idea of the coverage issues of this collection, so this is one of them that has 2,400 texts, and you can see that it focuses a lot on the first millennium of first 1,000 years of Islamic history. The second one, Shamila, which actually includes a lot of text from another collection, also very heavily focused on the first millennium, and there's as if there was nothing written at the time. This collection actually represents the Shiite, 12 Shiite tradition, but you can also see that also the emphasis is on the early period, and then there's the rise of late sort of Shiite scholarship represented in these collections. So altogether they include about 10,600 texts, but there's a very significant overlap between them. And but even if we look only at unique texts, we're still talking about 7,800 texts, about 7,800 unique texts, which amounts to 1.1 billion words. So it's like the number, I think, gets really kind of complicated. For me, that's too many zeros. But to give you a comparison, Perseus project, Perseus Digital Library, which is the oldest probably library of classical texts, includes text for Greek and Latin, and together that's only 25 million words. So and here's 1.1 billion words. So just to give you the sense of scale. In terms of genres and forms, you find a lot of very traditional Sunni scholarship there. Interpretation of the Quran, Hadith, prophetic sayings, legal writings. That's actually probably the largest part of this text is actually legal writings. Chronicles, biographical collections, books on Arabic language, poetry, and a lot of different dictionaries. Again, as I said, it's very difficult to evaluate how does that fit into the bigger picture of sort of Islamic written legacy, Arabic written legacy. And the problem, of course, is that we just have absolutely no idea how big it is and how we can. So what I've been trying to do is to compare with what we have in digital format, this only on a numeric level, with the data that we can find in this very nice 2-volume bibliographical collection written in early 20th century by Ismail Pasha al-Baghdadi. It's called Hadith al-Arifin, of Gift to the Knowledgeable. He includes 8,800 authors and lists about 40,000 books in this collection. So we can sort of start with that as a benchmark. But of course, I did quite a detailed analysis of that, and I can tell you that he doesn't cover Southeast Asia. He doesn't cover Volga region, for example, which are very prominent Muslim regions. Central Asia coverage is kind of spotty. No Sub-Saharan Africa at all. So, but it's the number that we can sort of work with. And so for example, this is the distribution of text in these collections. These 3 big collections that I mentioned. And this is what happens if we compare it with the coverage from Hadith al-Arifin from this bibliographical collection. You can see that having a digital format is only a fraction of what that could have been possibly written based on that bibliography. And also, you can see that the trend is very different. So the number of books is actually going up, not down, which makes sense because the Islamic world is extending and expanding. have more people. More people means more people writing. More people writing means more books. And here we have kind of the opposite trend. And this is what happens if we look. Sorry, that was authors, the number of authors that contribute, and this is the number of titles. And also you can see that it's just barely a fraction of what we have. That 1.1 billion words of Arabic. So we've been very concerned with that issue. Is that the coverage is not, it's a lot of text, but the coverage is not sufficient, and we sort of created this Islamic text initiative. Three of us, Sarah Savant, Matthew Thomas Miller, and me, and we've been devising a plan how to build a machine-readable corpus of Islamic text, starting with Arabic and Persian, but then hopefully expanding to cover all languages that we used for recording knowledge in the Islamic world. So what that implies, and what it means in specific terms, is that each text needs to have curated metadata, machine actionable metadata, so that you could pull out texts for a specific period, for a specific region, specific religious affiliation, and a specific genre, and sort of mix and match those combinations for your specific purposes. It also means the curating the quality of texts, in ensuring that they actually very well good reproductions of printed editions, and they have logical structures. So some level of tagging must be complete, so that you could pull out not only a text, but you could pull out a specific part of the text, and from the tagging, the machine could understand whether it's a biography, whether it's a chapter, whether it's a legal decision, and so on and so on and so on. All this system that we're developing includes essentially a unified location, which essentially would allow anyone to build on that. So any text-based, any text-related corpus would be able to use this system, and but the text will be just kept in one unified place, and everyone interested can contribute to the curation of quality metadata and analysis. So yeah, that's Open Arabic is a specific implementation of the project right now. It's available online on GitHub. There are currently about 1,700 texts in a very detailed kind of a format, structured, and all those kind of things. So you can go online and check it. Or just writing a link is a little bit long. If you just Google Open Arabic, you should be able to find it right away. We're using a very simple tagging system, kind of a markdown flavor that I developed for these purposes, which allowed me to already drag in a lot of colleagues who otherwise would have been scared to death if they've seen TI XML. If anybody knows what TI XML is, you know how complicated it is. And Markdown is just limited to a very small number of symbols, and then just kind of a structural division within the text file itself that are used as a kind of supplement tagging. So another way, of course, one of the most important ways to increase the coverage, to improve the coverage, is to have an OCR solution. Lex was a little bit in a hurry saying that we actually also have an OCR corpus. We don't yet. We've just came up with the working paper that shows that we have a working model for OCR in not only Arabic text, but also we've just got tests on Syriac as well, and in both cases we get results in high 90s. So that's the so far the highest quality. The octopus here. The reason is that the software that developed by Ben Kisling, University of Leipzig, it builds on the open source version of OCR called Ocr Corpus. And he named his version Kraken, so we named it Kraken, even Ocr Corpus, Kraken, the son of Ocr Corpus. So well, it's a kind of our logo, which is actually based on an octopus from an Arabic manuscript. So it's fun. And just to give you an idea of what's kind of under the hood, this approach is a neural network, which, to put it in a very, very simple layman terms, is using this pretty much the same approach as we human beings using when we learn things. In a sense that, you know, when you're just a child, capital M and small m look like two different things to you, and then there's Henry M, and then so on and so on and so on. But the more we see the examples of that and sort of build a connection that that's actually the same entity, just that looks different, we learn to recognize different variations of those. So neural network is using a similar approach to that. Here's the example. We trained it on one text, we got, so the 93% here shows the overall accuracy based on test, and here's the accuracy only on the level of Arabic letters. We got a lot of kind of issues with spaces, really not important for for the quality of OCR production. So we get 97% with that model. We tried it on different texts, and you can see we get different results, and that means that's because those editions that have different typefaces, here we ran the test on high quality scans, but we got relatively low results because typefaces were different, and sort of machine has never seen them before. So that's why kind of the quality accuracy went down. But there's actually we took two texts that are available online on this huge number of this libraries in a much lower quality, and we got much higher accuracy rates for them because they have a similar typeface. The biggest advantage of our approach is that we can train a model for any typeface. So we took the text which performed worse, we trained a model on that one, and we got back to our 97% accuracy rate. And also that model trained on this performed better, performed pretty well on the text, the other text that had a drop in accuracy. So what we're working on now is an online pipeline that would allow everyone to essentially OCR and post-correct Arabic texts, as well as to train models for different typefaces and things like that. So we hope that will change the field. Now to analysis of a biographical collection that I work on largely in the course of my dissertation, and I'm continuing to work on that. The book is called The History of Islam, Tarikh al-Islam, written by al-Dhahabi, who was a Damascene religious scholar, historian, and a jurist. So he put together this book, which in modern printed editions runs up to 50 volumes. So it's a really, really huge text. It covers, and it's a biographical collection, organized chronologically. You essentially have biographies put together in chronological order, covering 700 years, including over 30,000 biographies in this collection. So it's a very well-known text. I'm not the first one to work with it, but usually usually scholars work with it as a reference, as an encyclopedia to find biographies relevant to a particular subset or a particular social group within it. So what I was doing with this collection is kind of applying this distant reading, reducing complex objects to few elements that would allow to trace large trends. And in this case, that meant that I looked at all biographies, and each biography was essentially reduced to a series of characteristics, death dates. They allowed to place each individual chronologically, place names and toponyms. They allow us to place person geographically on a map. And descriptive names, this nisbas, they essentially offer us a social profile on an individual. So yeah, so just to give you an idea what they are. So this is an example of a traditional Arab name. That's the first name. That's the genealogy that goes back to the Prophet times, and in this case, to the first leader of the Muslim community after the prophets. Then we have this list of these nisbas, descriptive names, a couple of honorifics, and that's actually how everybody would refer to that individual. So first, nobody would ever use this long name. But these names, they tell us a lot about an individual. From them, we learned that he belonged to the tribe of Quraysh, which was the tribe of the Prophet. He belonged to a particular clan of time within the tribe. He was a descendant of this first rightly guided caliph, the leader of Islamic community. He was a resident and native of Baghdad. In this case, we know that for sure. He was a specialist in transmission and of the Prophet, Hafiz. He was an exegete of the Quran, belonged to Hanbali legal school, was a public preacher, and comes from a family that made its living. So it's a very rich, very robust social profile. As Arabists here and Islamicists here know, nisbas are not unproblematic. Sometimes they don't actually mean what they say, face value. But we're looking here at about 700 unique nisbas, unique descriptive names that describe at least 10 people. I'm not looking at low frequency names, and altogether about 700 of unique nisbas in that subset. 70,000 altogether that describe all this huge group of people. So, in terms of kind of a techie part, you know, the way I did it, the text have to be tagged so that again machine could identify a biography and separate one piece of text from another. Then processing, extracting descriptive names from the onomastic part. Dates from the structure, or you can also use regular expressions actually to extract dates from year statements from Arabic text because they're very consistent, and a few approaches to extract toponyms. I don't know how technical should I go or shouldn't, so I'll just leave it. I'll just leave it at that. If you have any question, let me know. Feel free to stop me and ask any question. And all that becomes kind of a machine-readable data that you can manipulate and look at different trends. I'm using a lot of frequency list again to identify things that are actually important, because if you have something that has a frequency 1 or 2 across a span of 30,000 individuals, you're probably not going to get anything interesting out of that. And using a lot of this kind of a scene set like auxiliary lists that allow you to group things into larger categories. So let's say in terms of toponyms, it allows you to group names of cities and villages into regions into provinces. Nisbas allow, or you can group them into let's say religious, professional, crafts, and so on and so on. So there's a kind of the mechanics of that. This is how it often looks like, which is it probably doesn't look like, but that's actually just a table format. It's a TSV format where you have several columns and information presented there and classified and based on their frequencies across the text. So what we can do with that, we can trace a lot of interesting social transformation. I'm not going to talk a lot about them because it's supposed to be more about geography than about Islamic society. But again, as I said, there are 700 unique nisbas with frequency 10 that describe at least 10 individuals. And if we try to look at them sort of in all the complexity and sort of split them into categories and groups, we can identify that there's several categories that describe individuals in terms of characteristics that they acquire by birth or a kind of against their wish, so to say. There's a physical defects or injuries, tribal affiliations, geographical affiliations, and belonging to ethnic groups. Of course, in the course of life, individuals could change this to becoming a member of a different tribe, moving from one place to another. But those are kind of still, by and large, beyond their control. Then there's a kind of a middle circle that describes positions, knowledges, trades, and statuses that people acquire in the course of their life, and all they can be divided into this large 4 sectors: the military, religious, civilian, and administrative sectors. So we can think through the descriptors about Islamic elites, kind of through these 4 categories. And if we look at how these categories change over time, and of course, it doesn't mean that individual belongs only to one category. They often wear multiple turbans, so and belong to multiple kind of sectors. And you can see that in military and administrative sectors are very small compared to others. But the dominant one is religious, and the civilian is not noticeable, but you can see that kind of by the end of the period, it's sort of it's in decline. What's interesting about that, and that's kind of a more sort of to the Islamicists here, is that we have this kind of preconception that these biographical collections are about religious scholars, first and foremost. But in this case, we can actually see that only 40% of these individuals in these biographical collections can be identified as religious specialists. And you can also see how that proportion changes over time, going from below 20% in the early period, hitting about 60% by the end of the period. But still, overall, it's only 40% of individuals whom we can treat as religious specialists. So other trends, we can see how the Islamic society, Islamic elites started as a tribal society, but in the course of the first 3 centuries, it stopped being tribal. We can look how the role of the military commanders changed over time. And in the 12th century, you can see how the presence of the military in the elites skyrockets. Again, most of the things that I'm showing right now is kind of known. I'm showing a different method of identification of things that we kind of sort of know. We can see how the how Waqf institutions, pious endowments come into the sphere of Muslim life, and we can gauge when it begins and when it sort of peaks. So that's very briefly about some kind of a social trends. We can talk about them more if you're interested, and I'm just concerned about time, and I want to speak more about geography. So coverage. I've been trying to kind of to make sense of how reliable the geographical coverage of this collection is, and this is a map that shows you which regions are covered. So the black dots are cities, and orange are regions that combine also dimensions of cities and the regions themselves. And you can see kind of it looks rather spotty. We don't have much here, here. I mean, those who know the geography of the region, it's quite understandable. But I've been, when you look at the traditional map of the Islamic world that represents roughly the same period, it kind of looks confusing. So this is how the Islamic world looks according to New Cambridge History of Islam, and this is what we get kind of in the coverage from the coverage of this biographical collection. So I've been trying to figure out how we can sort of improve the understanding of the geography where people actually live. Not that we color equally Iran, which has high density population, and Arabia, which has the lowest density of population, always had, still has, I looked at, I tried to use this visible Earth by NASA as one of the kind of models to sort of to visualize the inhabitable Earth. So, and here you can see this. This is sort of a light pollution that shows you kind of areas of densely populated areas. This I think, is absolutely beautiful. The Nile there. But of course, that reflects only like the highly developed regions, right? So if you have villages, you're not going to have that much light pollution from them. So I looked at data from nga.mil. It's a military website that has the descriptions of settlement of all settlements around the world, and they keep updating it all the time. So and I've just mapped the settlement. So the green area here is whenever we have a settlement, there's a green dot, and when they're close to each other, they start kind of shaping the territories where people live right now. There is a problem a little bit because administrative regions differ from country to country, but nonetheless, you can get the picture is that, okay, this region is actually clearly not inhabited. This one, not at all, except for Yemen, which has always been considered a sort of an agricultural oasis. Again, we can see rivers very nicely, and and so on and so on. The empty space here that sort of separates northeastern Iran and Central Asia, and then we can add urban areas, kind of to map more densely populated areas. But again, this is modern data. But we can think of that as in modern inhabited world is inhabitable world for the past. So it's kind of, it still gives us some kind of idea of how we can gauge that. And again, then if we map the coverage of this collection, it actually looks not as bad as in the very beginning, because it corresponds to the very strongly to those areas that by and large support agriculture and therefore support a larger density of population. So comparative perspective, another interesting thing would be to see just compared with other biographical collections, to what extent they're similar. And so this is a graph that based on the work of Richard Bullitt, and on a different collection, and it shows here each slice is 25-year period, I think, or 50-year period, and it shows a percentage of how many relatively how many people come from different region. And you can see that Arabia was prominent in the early period, then sort of disappears, kind of revives at the end of the first millennium. Iraq is very prominent, and Iran, but they kind of also disappear by the end of the period, and so on and so on. And if we generate a similar graph for Tarikh al-Islam, we actually get a very similar distribution. What is most interesting here is that the author of this collection is actually this sample includes 6,000 biographies. So that biographical collection is significantly smaller than the one that I'm using, and this one includes about 25,000 people. So despite the fact that they differ so significantly from each other and written 3 centuries apart, these two historians have a very similar representation of a kind of a cultural contribution in terms of geography. More people come, in the sense that more people come from one region, the more likely they influence in how intellectual trends are developed. Does that make sense? So, another interesting example is that, and that's based on the coverage of Spain. So we know from the introduction, and he says that he used particular Andalusian sources. And Maria Avila, the Spanish scholar, she collected everything that she could find on one century. And this is, I'm comparing what we have in Al-Dhahabi in Tarikh al-Islam on Al-Andalus and what she has altogether. And if we look at that closely, for each decade, he takes about from 40 to 50% worth of people from those sources. So there must be some kind of method that he's been using, and some kind of counting involved, selecting the biographies so that he actually creates a sort of a representative sample of other regions. So this is how the map would look if we sort of map it by regions, and I'm clustering here based on not so much on the Islamic geography of that time. Sort of some regions represent large provinces, others combine together because it's because Islamic geography is very complex, and I was trying to sort of to put it in some kind of manageable way. Let's put it this way. And again, we have, as I said before, we have chronological markers for all the biographies. So we not only can map that, we can also have this kind of the map of histograms of how the number of people is changing over time in each region. And so we see Andalus here, Central Arabia. You can see also like prominent in the early period, then disappears. Iraq is the most prominent region, but actually if we combine all the Iranian provinces together, it will be comparable to Iraq, and so on. So the core. I wanted to see how the Islamic world is connected based on these biographies, and this map of Facebook, where connections actually shape continents, was kind of used it as a sort of as a model for my data. I looked at tried different ways of representing how we can map each individual on put every individual on a map, and there are some difficulties here. It's difficult to determine where a person starts and how a person travels. It's technically we could probably try to come up with an itinerary, but it's also difficult because toponyms are mentioned in no particular order. I essentially went with this model that shows a person who has two geographical names. One is Baghdadi, and another one is Al-Basri, which means that he is affiliated, associated with those cities strongly enough to actually get the name that associates them with that place. So it could be by birth, could be by residence, could be some kind of other, but very strong, usually prolonged associations. And then his biography mentions Kufa, Medina, Mecca, and we essentially kind of draw this kind of network connecting each place to each place, and putting yellow dots to the places where a person most likely spend most of his time, based on on the assumption that Nisba is actually an indicator of that. So one other interesting thing before we get into kind of mapping the whole thing is if we look at how much people actually travel, and the red part here shows all people who whose biographies mention toponyms from more than one region. So they do travel, and we can make an assumption that they do travel across regions. And what you can see is that actually the mobile part of population of elites is actually relatively small. It fluctuates between 20 and roughly 20 and 40%, and mostly stays kind of below 30. And I think that's also a very interesting discovery, because we have this assumption in the field of Islamic studies is that the Muslim world was incredibly well connected, and people were traveling freely back and forth. But as I will try to show you, it's more complicated than that. And this graph also shows you that there wasn't really kind of a mass transregional travel among the elites. This data doesn't really include merchants, so that would be a different case, but we don't have data for that. So this is what happens if we put all these biographies together and sort of try to kind of visualize what's happening across time. And here's just to slow down. In the beginning, we have the core, that the three regions: Central Arabia, Iraq, and Syria, which are most dominant, and they are strongly connected. You see, the redder the line, the stronger, and the thicker the line, the stronger the connection, and the bigger the dot itself, the more people there. With the coming of the Abbasids, we can see this strong shift toward Iraq, and Khorasan, northeastern Iran here, but also connections to Egypt. But you can see that the configuration changes. As we move along, at some point we get kind of strong connections across the entire Islamic world, if you will. But by and large, we have this kind of a splitting of kind of quite identifiable regions. So this east and the west. And you can see the Andalusia, when it appears, it's still more oriented toward this region rather than toward the core. And by the end of the period, everything shifts to Syria and Egypt. So we can take all this data can be subset in many different ways to try to see different trends. So, for example, we can look only at Andalusians. So here's the map of connections of people whom we can identify as strongly associated with Al-Andalus. And you can see the connections are strongest with North Africa and Egypt. And the further we go east, the density of connections drops significantly. And that works for northeastern Iran as well. Strongest connections are toward Iraq. And very rare Iranian makes it as far as Al-Andalus, actually. So if we compare this networks of each region, what we actually get is some kind of a overlapping networks. Each region is more strongly connected with its immediate neighbors, but through that you get this kind of a very dense network. So knowledge books can travel quite easily, but practices are tied very tightly toward the actual networks. So only as far as people go, and that's it's another part of my work on teaching networks. I won't dwell on this right now, but that's a very interesting example of how this kind of geographical networks play in that. And of course, then we can look at that dynamically. And if you look at Al-Andalus here, you will see how the vector of connection changes from Egypt to North Africa. So all this is constantly moving. It's incredibly dynamic, and sort of catch it by the tail is actually very, very difficult. And all our nice schemas of divisions and the dynastic periods and all that kind of stuff sort of crumbles. Although at the same time we can identify there's a correlation between the number of people in the elites and the dynastic periods in particular regions. So we can take a look at urban centers as well. So here's a dynamic map that will show you how the role of different urban centers changes over time. And before I start, I just want to draw your attention that first you'll see this region, then Baghdad and Iran, then you'll see Al-Andalus, and by the end of the period, you will see a Fertile Crescent coming from Egypt, Syria, Jazeera, and kind of touching Iran a little bit. So another way to looking at that. So we, of course, actually another thing which was a bit of surprise to me when I realized that is actually, in order to study geography, you don't actually need maps. sometimes other means of showing, of kind of visualizing geographical data are actually more efficient. And so here, this is the map of the chronological graph of the number of people that come from Medina, Basra, and Kufa. Again, you can see how prominent the centers are in the early period, but they practically disappear in the course of the third Islamic century. Then we have intermediate centers. Baghdad, excuse me, Baghdad dwarfs everything. But you can also see that Isfahan, Nishapur, the Iranian centers are quite prominent. Cordoba and Al-Andalus in general. The late centers, Egypt more generally, and Damascus. See, it's not particularly prominent, but then across most of the period, but then it skyrockets. The curve of Egypt is very interesting. This is the coming of the Fatimids, the Shiite dynasty into Egypt, and you can see kind of the scholarly community essentially collapses in Egypt. This is roughly the time Salahuddin conquers Egypt and puts the end to the Fatimid dynasty, restoring the sort of the Sunni ideology of Egypt, and you can see it starts growing back. Geographies of social and religious groups is another thing that we can look at through this approach. And these are, for example, the geographical maps networks of 4 legal schools. So we have Hanafis, Malikis, Hanbalis, and Shafis. The geography kind of should not be surprising to people who study Islamic law. It's what we usually think about that. But here we have sort of a data-driven map based on biographical collections. And of course, more interesting thing is when we look at that at the dynamics. So, for example, we have the Shafi, probably the biggest school in this collection. In the early period, is very strongly present in Iraq and Iran, and only by the end of the period sort of shifts to Egypt and Syria. So then, that was kind of a very, very, very quick nutshell of the social geographies, and I would like to now talk a little bit about work on Islamic geography that we're doing right now. We've actually focused more on geography rather than on social geography. So we've been working on the creation of the gazetteer for the Islamic world, and that was one of the most difficult things when I started, is that there was actually no geographical data to work with, and you cannot map anything unless you have coordinates and geographical data. So this was the first iteration of our gazetteer. It's based on one of the printed atlases, Georgette Cornu's atlas of the Islamic world in the 11th century. Includes about over 2,000 toponyms, and was built together with Cameron Jackson when I was at Tufts. We then improved this version. We added primary sources, Mohammad Burdan and Stefan and Sav into that, so that in most cases you can find a place and actually go and read the primary source on that. Then Cameron decided to work on do a kind of a digital project for her bachelor's thesis, we were very, very much impressed by the Orbis project for the Greco-Roman world, and we tried to implement that functionality for the Islamic world. So what you see here is it's kind of a flooding network. This is the city of Marv, and I'll explain its importance in a minute. And all the green dots are places that are within 10 days of travel from that city. So Marv, here's another visualization. So this is Marv, and we have the important places here: Bukhara, Herat, Naisabur, and Nishapur, as you know probably better. And all of them are within 10 days of travel, essentially, from the city of Marv. And the city of Marv was the capital of the Eastern Abbasid Caliphate. And if you read the description of Marv, it's the worst place to live, because there's so many diseases and infections and all that. Why would you do that? And if we look at this network, it's a very nice visualization, because it's the place from which you can actually control and it's like an equidistant place from other important urban centers like Nishapur, Herat, and Bukhara. And actually what happens after the fall of the Abbasid dynasty is Ma'rib actually stops existing, and we have the development of local dynasties in those centers, which otherwise were kind of kept in check if you keep your residence there. So so that's kind of this kind of things that we're trying to do, and trying to ask and answer historical questions. So I'll get back to this in a second. And this is the latest iteration of our gazetteer, and you can see we're trying to sort of to model and visualize regions based on the descriptions, on classification. So it's kind of the data generated automatically through linked data, through classifications within data. So we have these visualizations of regions. So this is the region of Khorasan, and you can go online and sort of play around, click on this thing, look at the divisions of the Islamic world based on 10th, 11th century sources. We have this kind of a finding pathfinding algorithm there developed, which works very similar to what Orbis is doing, or think of it as Google Maps for the classical Islamic world. So here, for example, it shows you the route from Baghdad to Damascus, Dimashq, and the red line shows you the shortest route. But of course, that's a suicide, geography, because you're going through a desert. And I think I can only think of one description when it's actually been done, and that was, the troops were sent from Baghdad to Damascus to put down the rebellion. Otherwise, people would take a long route where you have a more populated area. You can sort of start at a settlement and end your day at a settlement, and kind of never end up spending night in a hostile territory environment. And so that was our first kind of result, because there's a very simple Dijkstra algorithm that allows it to find the shortest path in the network. But then we tweaked it to try to find another way which has more way stations. And now if you add one place and like start and end, show you the shortest path and the path that people would most likely taken because it was more safe, based on the assumption that you would prefer the path that has more places along the way. So we have some primary sources there right now as well. So you can click on a place and read a record from primary sources. Right now we have only one, but we're planning to add more and keep on adding them. And in general, also our kind of research in terms of geography moves toward extracting and modeling data from primary sources, which includes route networks, because many of our geographical sources describe them in great details, where you go from, where to, and how long it takes. We're trying to use the network data that we derive from primary sources to triangulate locations of places that don't exist anymore, and visualizing regions using different kind of approaches, and then using all that to build a dynamic network of individuals that we can sort of excavate from the biographical collections and put on top of that geographical model that would simulate their movements across the time. So that would be it.
Well, I'll start with a question. So on the finding rule, the route finder, the green line that they'd be more likely to travel, is that auto-generated based on like the incidence of where people?
Network data. Just network data looking for preferring a path that has more settlements along the way.
Okay.
But that's the next step that we want to do, is to actually to inform this network by the number of biographies that we have. So for example, let's say if we have Raqqa here, right? It's a pretty important center. So the route should have actually gone through that. So kind of we didn't quite get it right computationally. But at the same time, you know, you would go through that place if you're premodern Muslim and you're traveling. You would go through the places where you can sort of increase your social, cultural capital by studying with other scholars. So if a center has, if a city is a thriving center, you will definitely go through it. And what we want to sort of to incorporate is kind of when we have biographical data, it will sort of act like a magnet and will sort of push the route closer to those. And effectively, we will get different networks from different collections, and in the long run, from all the biographies that we can. And we have about 400,000 biographies in that corpus, so we've got a lot of work to do.
So most of what you're looking at are scholar biographies?
Not quite, because as I showed, it's only like 40% that we can be sure that these are religious scholars, specialists. But by and large, these are people who are involved in the transmission of religious knowledge, which and then it actually varies. It varies from period to period because at the end of the period, even military commanders involved in transmission of religious knowledge, and we find records of that in biographies. So if your question is about how representative is it over broader circles of Islamic society.
Yeah, I was going to get to that.
Yeah.
There are places where you can correlate those sorts of professions.
Yeah, that's very difficult. That's a problem we have with this biographies. So we just need to figure out how to work with that.
About the collection of biographies, the geography you get is really a subjective one, right? I mean, you're not telling us that this is the complete network as it existed, because if you complement it with other biographical essays from other places, you will get a different map. And I suppose that's my question. I suppose that you want to expand
Yes. Yeah.
the type of data you have, not only in time but also in space, right?
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I've done similar analysis of Hadith al-Arifin, which is again much smaller, but it covers much broader geography. And roughly, when at the period when we have this kind of disappearance of Iran and shift to Syria, first Iraq, then Syria and Egypt, and sort of connections of Iranians are directed towards this way. What we're missing is actually that there are also other paths to Anatolia and India, and actually Hadith al-Arifin shows that on a smaller scale, but still you can actually see that Iranians not only moving to Iraq and Syria, but also to those two regions, which the Hadith doesn't cover. Is it because chronologically? I don't think it has anything to do with his ideological agenda. But
he knows or what he's interested in. I mean,
it's very difficult to assess agenda of a person who puts together 30,000 biographies.
I'm not speaking of an agenda.
Yeah.
But I mean, this comes from one person who's interested in a certain number of things he knows, right? I mean, it's very hard for me to imagine that this is a reflection of intellectual networks all the time in the Islamic world. I mean, it's part of it.
No, of course.
The eye of someone who is from Damascus, right? So my question is, if you took the same type of computation from someone else, let's say in Andalus or in the Maghreb, wouldn't you have the map a little bit different? With
most likely, most likely.
So basically, can it be the complete or the exact reflection or the objective reflection of? It's in part, yes.
Well, I mean,
subjective map, right?
Of course, it is subjective. I mean, but the problem, of course, is to assess. It's kind of we should probably approach it in terms of like probabilities. What is the probability of it being objective and the probability of being subjective? And I'm not sure, which one overweights another, because As I was showing this example of Al-Andalus, is that he's going very thoroughly in, methodically picking 40 to 50% of biographies for each decade. Right? He's trying to build a representative sample. I'm not saying that this network actually represents the entire Islamic world, but from what I'm gathering, he is doing his he's sincere in what he's doing.
I'm sure
He's trying to do that. But of course, no. The next step, yes, is to actually incorporate all biographical collections. The problem is that we still not going to have a point of reference, right? I mean, they all, subjective. They all.
By putting them all together.
By putting them all together, that should give us kind of a.
Remove quite a lot of the bias you get by picking one point.
Oh no, absolutely. Yeah, that's a kind of a long-term plan.
Presumably also that's true for trying to get time periods separate. I mean, obviously, particular centers change for you, either intellectual life or for political life or whatever. And I would presume as you get more data from different texts, you can begin to do that kind of layering as well as geographical layering.
Sorry, I didn't quite get what
I mean, chronological layering of when particular areas are much more important, particularly if you're dealing with the ulama or you're dealing with intellectual life.
Right.
That's going to shift.
No, absolutely. I would actually show you that.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, what I'm saying is that you're going to need, presumably as you get, it becomes more accurate the more text from different places.
Of course. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And of course, again, the next sort of simple step is to take a network, let's say, of Al-Andalus, and I think that would be probably the easiest because we have both Andalusian biographical collections in digital format, so the same kind of method can apply to them, and to compare the network that we get from Al-Dahabi and with the network that we get from Andalusian sources, and to see that will kind of again give us sort of a full intact kind of picture of how they correspond to each other. Right. So, yeah.
Perhaps a silly question, but another research tool coming specifically from this text is that you've created a phenomenal sort of index in a way for other scholars who might want to study everybody who has one particular mitzvah or come to one publishing something like that. The other question that I had with regard to your own research question, do you ever take a particular event and show how that impacts that representation of the world, like the Crusades or an earthquake, to see when people move?
Well, I mean, I haven't done that kind of in too much details, but I've been looking at the sort of dynastic shifts and in particular this kind of conflict between the Fatimids and the Abbasids, and you can see how the geographies shift during that time. But again, it's not quite. It's very difficult to say to what extent that is actually doing it consciously, right? Like that. But it corresponds to sort of there's kind of a correlation between the way he describes political events, and this kind of and the number of people that would have and find here. So there is that. Yeah. But I haven't dwelled on a case study like that. And with to your question about publication, yeah, I'm in conversation now with Stanford University Press to do this kind of a digital project as a scholarly publication, and they got this Mellon grant actually to figure out how you publish digital scholarship, peer review it, and get sort of full credit of actual, hardcore research work as well. It's just kind of a very new form that doesn't feed into kind of a standard format very easily.
Oh, sure. I'm sure that so many scholars and teachers, pedagogues,
Oh, I'm actually periodically getting emails from colleagues saying it's like, hey, we use your maps in the class. Very cool. Give us more. So no, yeah, that's and I'm very happy with it. And another problem that comes with that is that, you know, as soon as I started working on that, I realized limits of my knowledge very quickly. Because here you're not looking at something specific that you know very well, you just bombarded by everything that source has, and that kind of takes you, forces you to try to figure out, okay, what can you do with that? So many things that make no sense to me, but they would make sense, a lot of sense to my colleagues who working on specific subjects, and they can, and the trend will make sense for them. The geography will make sense for them, right? And the movement pattern will make sense for them. So yeah.
Well, I want to, let's take one last question and then we'll break up.
May I?
Yeah, please.
I was fascinated. I found the early graphs you showed about the ulama, the military, the civil service, but also the one where we showed the Awqaf and madrasa. So could we go back to those just to get a better look? If you could tell us more about it.
Well, yeah, that's the topic of another whole presentation. Those graphs.
So this one and the one before I played before. Could you tell us more about how you get that and what you read also in that? I find that quite fascinating.
Yeah, I actually should open another presentation. So if you want, I don't know how the rest of the group is interested in doing that. Otherwise, I can walk you through individually, because I need to open another one where I have actually more slides and build upon the narrative. But essentially, what's happening here is that, yeah, we identified this pattern of a growth of military. So it's not that there were no umara, and I'm looking at only individuals who describe it. It's not like there were less umara here, but scholars just didn't pay attention to that, right? But what's happening here is that it's on a different graph. They start building establishing endowments, right? And you can actually identify them. I have another graph that actually shows different madrasas, and we can see like there's a very similar nizamiya when it kind of goes up, and then by the end of the period it starts disappearing because Iraq doesn't pretty much exist anymore as a cultural center anymore. But you have a lot of small madrasas in Syria and Egypt that just kind of keep on going up. The military change, another interesting thing that happens is that the pattern of honorific changes. In the middle period, roughly here, they have something like Saif ad-Dawla, anything and Dawla, right? It's kind of the sort of dynasty, supporter of dynasty, edge of dynasty, and so on and so on. But by the end of the period, they adopt Fulan ad-Din pattern, and Fulan ad-Dawla doesn't exist anymore. So it's another kind of trend that shows kind of the attempt to integrate into those.
For the Awqaf, for instance, were you able to have the data on the founders of the Awqaf?
Well, not through this method. Then you need to. The way this whole thing works is that things kind of identify them through distance reading, right? Looking at a lot of data, identifying a particular period or place where you need to dig in and actually do real close reading. Then you go back and do that. I haven't done it for a long time. No. My research mostly, this is kind of a preparatory stage for the analysis of creatures. They didn't talk about them at all.
So when you show the yellow line here, it's just about the number of Awqaf.
It's not the number of Awqaf. It's the number of biographies that mention Awqaf.
That mention Awqaf.
Yeah. And so these are the mentions of madrasas, and you can see that roughly at this period they start being mentioned. And we know that there was a resistance to madrasas, to Awqaf institutions, right, in general, among scholars in the beginning, but then it just kind of overtakes that. And
so it's just possible that the using mentions of our path is just going parallel and correlated to the fact that we see more and more madrasa being mentioned. Right?
Well, I mean, in a sense, yes. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Those Zawiya, Maristan, Khanqa, and Al-Pap, they mentioned in the same kind of connection, right? Because madrasa is just a particular font, right? But those are the most frequent: Zawiya, Maristan, Khanqa, and then they're all often just a mention of Al-Pap without any specification. So that's kind of what it is there. Another graph that I have is very interesting on the shift of mentions of relatives in biographies. So we have, it looks like there's its high point here, then it goes down to 0, and then it skyrockets. And then also if we look at what kind of relatives are mentioned. In the early period, it's fathers, because it's tribal society, it's important, the importance of lineage. But then it kind of goes down almost to 0, just not mentioned anymore. And then suddenly it skyrockets, and then we look into composition of what kind of relatives are mentioned. It's now not only fathers but also mothers. It's siblings and spouses and kind of members of extended families. So the shift from lineage to household, which is very kind of easily identifiable through this method. And again, we have studies that show that argue exactly that. But it's very interesting to actually see from a different angle, from kind of a data-driven perspective, that can we get the confirmation, or somebody just got too much into close reading and started mentioning things. Right? I think that happens to all of us once in a while. So yeah, and I do have an article that actually talks about that. Well, about these trends, and not yeah, all those kind of several. I'm taking several major. I've been going through them, showcasing based on this data.
I'll have to have the reference.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, I just want to thank Maxim again for showing us this computationally intensive use of Arabic texts and how it fits in with geographic analysis. Thanks again for coming to the colloquium, and thank you.
Walk too far away from the computer.
We need to get to that thing to turn it off.
Oh, you didn't.